Hey, welcome to another episode of The Search Bar. If you're an attorney, your next client isn't finding you on TikTok. They're searching Google or other search engines for estate planning attorney near me or Tampa personal injury lawyer. And what you see in your Google business profile can be the difference between a signed case and a missed opportunity. I'm Eric Ritter, founder of Digital Neighbor and your SEO sommelier. And on the Search Bar, we're diving into how attorneys and professional service firms can dominate local search and turn their Google business profile into a lead generation powerhouse. Back on the mic for a second time, friend of the podcast, Brantley Smith, CEO of HomePro Marketing. Brantley, thank you so much for joining us today again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Brantley is a digital growth strategist who's helped brands generate over 15 million leads. Let me say it again, 15 million leads. That's a lot. Scale to 50 million annual recurring revenue, and most importantly, crack the code on how service-based businesses, including law firms, can win locally. So we're going to talk tactics, triggers, and what law firms need to do right now to stay ahead in Google's ever-evolving local search landscape. So you ready to get into it, Brantley? I know this is something you have a lot of expertise in.
Let's do it. Let's jump in, man.
Yeah, so let's talk about Google Business Profile, right? I was a marketing director at law firms, and we paid a lot of money for the yellow pages, and it was very simple back then because whoever was the longest in the yellow pages would get moved to the front of the attorney section. So you just would try to be that final survivor to get to that first position under attorneys in yellow pages. And it was much simpler, right? So your rankings were just based on how long you were paying the yellow pages, right? But nowadays we got the Google Business Profile, which pretty much is today's version of the yellow pages, really only smarter, faster, and I think way more powerful. So Brantley, since you've been doing this, why, in your opinion, is Google Business Profile such a game changer for local businesses?
Yeah, and it's funny you taking me back there on the yellow pages, but I remember when companies used to name themselves, AAA11, attorney of the law.
Let's add another A in front of it.
Just a matter of getting enough A's in front of it. But yeah, I mean, the real answer is just following. If you follow the consumer behaviors out there, you engineer your strategies from that, you'll win. So if you know that people that are, you mentioned Tampa personal injury, lawyer, great, very high competition, term. And it's a low funnel term, meaning, it's people that are actively looking for that. So in order for you to be a player, in particular today, we can get into all the AI stuff and, AI overviews versus the new AI mode. And, but today the makeup of the search engine results page is generally going to be Google, guaranteed or Google screened, in the case of attorneys.
Yeah, the very top. Yep.
At the very top. And then you have sponsored, general, what people refer to as pay-per-click, but paid search. Google Ads, and then below that you have your Google Apps 3-pack, if you will, where there's 3 Google Business Profile pages that are featured. And when you talk about what triggers that, and of course below that you have your organic results, which generally come from your website. So occupying all that real estate is really important, and there's things to know of how to go about it. But to answer your specific question, what makes GBP so Google Business Profile page, or GBP, I'll call it moving forward, so important is because people that are in your local market that are looking for a retailer, a restaurant, an auto mechanic, a personal injury attorney, whatever they're looking for, roofer, Google understands that those are local and will serve up that map pack. 42% of the click activity, the interaction from a consumer in that local market, is in the GBP. So When you start breaking down just the percentages of user behavior, it ranges from 14 to 25% for the paid stuff at the top. It's 25% if Google local service ads show up, or Google screened ads show up. In addition to paid search, it's only 14% if those don't show up and it's just paid search. But it's 42%, nearly half are
Yeah.
going to the GBP. And it's probably because we're all consumers and we're looking for reviews. We're looking for how many reviews do they have? What is the review rating? And also proximity. Are they indeed local? So you look at that map to the right and you're like, I know where I live or I know where I work. Where is it in proximity to me? So it's a huge conversion point. And then when you go organic, it's around 28%. So they're all important, but when you look at the GBP, it is by far the one that has proportionally the most user activity when you're doing a local search. So that's your answer.
That makes sense. No, and I appreciate kind of, the statistics and kind of putting it in context, right? Because the whole search engine results page is important. And I think you really want to try to dominate as much as possible. But a good place to start, it sounds like, since it's getting almost half the clicks, 42%, is the Google Business Profile. So if that's where you want to start, Brantley, what are some mistakes that you see people make there that, might be common pitfalls when people are trying to come up high and get those clicks on Google Business Profile?
Yeah, absolutely. See quite a bit complacency. So knowing you have a GBP, maybe have claimed it or potentially created one, but didn't really do much with it. So that's the biggest challenge, is just making sure that people understand that they need to post updates. Just treat it like a social media channel. There's different ways to do that. And then the update itself, what's important to put in the update to make sure that it gets you the most optimization, if you will. The lack of focus on acquiring reviews or managing your services in a way that you're consistently producing a good customer experience, and the reviews that you are getting are positive reviews. So having a methodology for understanding how the reviews factor in to Google's decision on whether to show you versus somebody else. It's part of their algorithm. It's part of their formula, and the weight that each of these things carry can vary, but they're all very important. So really going in and making sure that you have an optimization plan for uploading your logo and making sure your business name, your phone number, your address is not only accurate. Highly recommend testing it against the USPS website. Make sure you actually have one the post office understands is the right suite number, for example. So
yeah.
Those little things make a big difference as well. And then having an understanding of how your Google Business Profile page works with your website and how local SEO in general works together, because your local website and how your GBP are structured do have correlations. They do impact one another. And we can dive into any of those areas. There's a lot, we can unpack there. But yeah, as far as common errors, it's usually just a lack of attention to the GBP itself, not populating their products, not populating their services, or maybe doing it incorrectly. There may be keyword stuffing or doing something that they think maybe is helpful, but it's really not.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. Q&As are really important. So questions and answers. A lot of people look at that, business owners, and they'll say, well, that's really for consumers, or potential customers to really post the question, and then we would go in and answer it. But it's actually there for you to pose questions yourself as well and answer it yourself. There's there's no Google guideline against that. So it's a really good idea to think through those common questions that people will ask, especially if it's localized. If it's very pertinent to the local market, draw that out. How do you pick a really good personal injury lawyer in Tampa? Because there's so many, there's a lot of competition. So
absolutely.
That's a great question that a lot of people are going to type into Google, and you want to have a good response for it because it might get picked up as part of that algorithm.
Yeah. So one thing I heard in there, Brantley, is, obviously consistency, and accuracy, but also making sure that you're taking advantage of everything that the Google Business Profile offers, right? There's so many different, I think, nuances and little things, like you mentioned, products, services. And I know from personal experience, like when you fill it out, Google actually gamifies it somewhat and says, hey, you're 60% there, 80% there. You got to fill in all the information. Is that enough just to kind of go by Google's guidelines there? Or are there, certain things that you say you have to do above and beyond maybe on that Google business profile? Like you said, maybe posting updates in the Q&A, but what other things should we really be paying attention to besides what Google says, okay, now you've 100% completed that setup?
Yeah, and people will point that out a lot. They're like, look, my profile strength is not completely a closed green circle.
Yeah.
How do we get it there? And it's funny because there's sometimes it's hard. It's sometimes it's a little bit of guesswork trying to figure out. Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes I know I might be wrong here, but I feel like at one point Google is like, you need to start running ads to get it 100% or sign up for the ads account, which just cracks me up. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not part of your Google business profile, but it's smart on their end from a business standpoint.
It is, and everything has to drive that stock price. So
yeah, that's right.
But yeah, so you want that to be closed or very close to it is fine, as long as you touched all the things and you've done it correctly, then it's fine. But there are other things, and that's usually where the kind of rubber meets the road. There's a lot of law firms, that maybe your younger law firms, they got out of law school, they did their time, with another firm, they started their own firm, and they're just now with a brand new, fresh location, they're a brand new, fresh GBP, and, they have, no reviews, or maybe they have a handful of reviews. That's a tough place to start. So, the only way really generally around that is to do all the things, the best practices of optimizing and maintaining and constant updates. Anything, the more detailed, the better. So those updates are really important about talking about local people. You don't want to disclose anything, obviously, that's going to get you in trouble or might be regulated, but you want to put enough in there that it's familiar, it localizes the conversation. So it might be about helping somebody that was over in Pinellas County that had this specific situation, and this was a great outcome, blah, 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 blah. In the case of services, you do before and after photos. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to leverage that. But there's more that you can do to overcome some of the things that tend to factor in heavily for how companies are showing up in those top positions in the map pack, where they've been in business for 15 years and maybe they have 1,000 reviews, and like, how do I overcome that as a young business? Yeah. And in most cases, it's very difficult to, and sometimes impossible. However, if you know an agency that, like yours, that understands some techniques, and, my experience with it too, where you can do link building, for example. And again, it's a loaded topic. So there's a lot, you can make a whole podcast just on that, the right way to do it and the wrong way. But we have used a technique in the past that we continue to use that basically uses the CID, or the unique identifier of the GBP itself, that Google understands. Google creates that unique identifier, and you actually append it into a specific type of URL structure that you use in the anchor text for the backlink for niche articles and bloggers and people that you're working with to get these published. So if you're earning good backlinks, which of course, I don't know the level of explanation we need to give for your audience. Yeah. Link building is a signal that Google will pick up on that says, hey, a high domain authority or a trusted source, whether it's an organization or a blog writer or, a news outlet, where they have, writers and editors and so forth, mentioned you, or they mentioned something about a service that's related to you, and they actually link in their article or their blog or, back to your website, for example. You can do something similar to Google Business Profile pages, but the link structure is incredibly specific on how to do it. But that can create some of those signals as well that are ranking factors, much like you would do link building for a website. And then there are other things. So, branding, I know this is kind of... Yeah,
I just want to put a pin right in there, Brantley, because that was fantastic information, right? We got really technical there. And I think before we started recording, we're kind of joking about titles, right? And, you went with CEO. Maybe we should have gone with Chief Nerd Officer, because that was really great, good stuff there, right? Kind of that link building. We're getting into kind of making sure that the listeners, viewers kind of understand that it's one thing to show up, right? But another one is to rank when it matters, right? And like actually showing up. It's just like any other business. You get a bunch of reviews. It's very easy to show up at the top. But if you're a new established business, like you said, you're a new attorney, you broke off, et cetera, there's other techniques that you can apply in order to kind of push up the authority, the reputation of your business profile. And you got into their very deep link building. And I'm sure some of the listeners will have follow-up questions. So I'm going to send them your way, Brantley, because I'm sure you can kind of help them a little bit more there, because we've had other episodes about link building for websites on here, like with Ben Anderson, which was fantastic. And so it seems like that's a very similar technique that you would use for the Google business profile as well, that you've successfully done. And that's a great kind of trick. I wouldn't say trick, but that's one way to crack kind of that local 3-pack, is pushing up your authority in different ways than just reviews through link building.
Without question. And that's exactly. And thanks for slowing that down a little bit there, because it probably needed, a little bit of a recap, because it is technical. But at the end of the day, you're just looking for trusted sources that basically say, we trust you, we trust your business. And that's a great way to do it if it's done correctly. There's a lot of ways to do it incorrectly. So I do not recommend just running out and try to, find the first person that does link building and say, hey, can you do it to my GBP?
Right.
It's probably a mistake. But we can field any questions, afterwards. It's fine. I can help clarify those things.
Yeah, no, and then you were talking about branding as well. Is that another way to help kind of crack that local 3-pack for someone who isn't in there yet?
Yeah, I think so. This is an evolving thing too, because, branding's tough. People have a hard time kind of wrapping their brain around the ROI and all this kind of thing. And one of the things that we have to, that can kind of creep into the conversation a little bit is, AI and, the Google AI mode in particular, which is, an evolution of the AI overviews that we've been seeing, depending on the, the type of thing we type into Google, is coming. So the reinvention of just kind of how search works, and raises all kinds of questions around content, and where does your website fit in? Where does paid media fit in, and pay-per-click and things like that. But not to overbroaden the conversation, I think that in itself, and the fact that Google is really pushing down this path of, I'll draw on the EEAT, Google standards for, trustworthy type of content that's out there. And one of the things that I do know from experience through testing with GBP and so forth is that the more people that are actually Googling branded terms. So think about it this way. They see your TV spot on a connected TV media buy, they hear you on digital radio, or they see a digital billboard or a billboard at work. You have mobile ads, running, or you're retargeting people on Facebook, or, these things that create brand recognition around your logo and your business name. And let's say you're Tampa personal injury lawyers. They're a local Tampa, firm I just picked from the map pack here. And you're doing that sort of thing. Well, at the end of the day, you're not necessarily expecting a flood of phone calls every time that TV spot runs, because that's not necessarily how it works, but you want recall. So when somebody's actually in the need for, a personal injury attorney, and they do a Google search, the likelihood of them not only recognizing your GBP helps, but if people remember your name, let's say it's, Tampa personal injury lawyers, which also happens to be very SEO centric. They probably, name the company that way.
Right.
For SEO purposes.
Yep.
But maybe take another one. We'll do Morgan and Morgan. I mean, it's probably trademarked and we'll probably get sued. But anyway, the point is that Morgan and Morgan is a very big brand. So when people type that in, Google actually understands that that's a branded term. and it understands that there's a Morgan & Morgan GBP, and it is almost assuredly going to obviously bring up the Morgan & Morgan in the top of the map pack because of that. So there's lots of little things where you're like, because the more branded search that you get, now I don't know if you've ever, just the listeners, if you ever go into your GBP when you're an admin and you click on the performance button, one of the things you can do is scroll down to the right-hand side, and you can see searches showed your business profile in the search results. So it's what are the actual searches people search. More often than not, the top ones are branded terms. Not always, but very often that's the case. Right. And those are gold in terms of GBP. So if you're able to have more brand efforts that are out there where people are doing research even, and they're Googling the business name and so forth, those actually weigh into the weighting system for your GBP in terms of rankings, and will help you show up more for people who are not searching through your brand. It's a little bit of a brain teaser, but my point is that having all it really does is it kind of goes back to the fundamentals of saying, look, if you're going to advertise, it's not all about just straight lead gen. That's often very expensive and unsustainable.
Right.
You really do have to build a brand, and between recall and the recall improving click-through rates through your paid media and your organic media, including your GBP, and the impact of branded searches actually helping you show up more in the map pack specifically, the more that happens, the more you're also going to show up for similar service-based or research-based kind of queries that don't include your business name, because Google sees you as relevant because there are people looking for you specifically.
Right.
So it's an interesting concept there. It's not as direct line as a lot of people would prefer it to be. Like, well, what do I do? Well, advertise and market yourself. Advertising works. But it's really important for people to understand that how those searches, in particular branded searches, really do impact and improve your overall Google, or GBP rankings. So think of it in a bigger picture. I think that's part of what I'm trying to say.
No, I think that's great insight, right? Because we're getting so in the weeds here. Usually when you think about Google Business Profile, right, the three things that matter are proximity, how close are you to someone, right? And that's something you can't really always control, right? Where your office is, where you meet with clients, that's where it is. Relevance is something that we talked about earlier, where let's make sure you're filling in all your info. You got all your services, you got all your products, you got all your photos and everything. But then that third one, the reputation, is something that we can really operate in and help get those rankings up, right? Because it's not just about reviews, it's about other websites raising their hands and saying, hey, this map listing matters through backlinks, or hey, people are searching for this company or for this brand, so they must be reputable, so we're going to rank them higher, right? Which I think is kind of Google's way of saying, hey, these people are doing real company shit, right? They're doing advertising, they got billboards, something else. So people are searching for them. So that means they have a good reputation, or have at least a reputation, let's say, right? Because, and almost I'm thinking about it now, Brantley, like, they always say, there's no such thing as bad PR, right? So even I guess if you're in trouble, you did something bad and people are searching for you, that might help because there's more branded searches, right? Whatever it takes to get those branded searches to give that signal to Google that you are reputable, which is great. And then you kind of started getting into AI a little bit. And I know that's always top of mind for everyone. Would love to kind of hear from you a little bit about automations, AI, and managing locations, and kind of scaling that presence. Because a lot of times when I think of AI, I think of diminished quality, or because whenever you have more quality isn't as good. And so wondering if you have any tips or tools or automations that you use to scale the presence without sacrificing that quality and thus your reputation.
Yeah, that's always a tough one. And it's an ever evolving thing. Google's position on, AI, copy is, they're trying to be open about it. But say, look, even if you have AI assisted copywriting, maybe even for your GBP updates, make sure it's valuable, make sure it has a human element to it, make sure it's EEAT compliant. And so, there are ways to augment, some of the updates and the activities that are happening, even posting and automating, questions and answers is possible through the API. So, the question then becomes how much of it, how do you prompt it correctly? So how do you set up, some sort of an automation to kind of give you a helping hand in creating the signals and the activity that you want and saying the right things that are going to be helpful and useful and readable and human. And then as an augmentation to what you're doing yourself as a real human being, because we're not there, we still really need to watch the quality of the content.
Yeah.
So I only recommend doing it as an augmentation to human posts. You can use tools like make.com, which is fantastic for multi-step automations. It's very visually configured, so you don't have to be super technical to use it, but expect a learning curve. If you're not familiar with maybe Zapier or something similar. Zapier, can be used as well, but Make is great, especially when you're working with ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever large language model you're using, and you can put really great, rich, NEAT compliant prompts in a multi-step Make automation to be able to then integrate with your GBP, and you can schedule it, and maybe even randomize it. There's ways to randomize it and do things that just kind of make it feel and act more human. But use it sparingly and keep a very close eye on the output, because these models are being updated regularly. You might be using 4.0, for example, but they make modifications to 4.0 all the time. One day it's hallucinating, one day it's not. One day it does a great job, one day it's, you're just like, it's getting better. But I would highly recommend keeping an eye on those posts because they can become redundant. There's ways to make your automation go and look at your existing posts to make sure you're avoiding redundancy or you're overusing the same words or starting the sentence the same way, in your post, because it will do that if you don't think those things through. But there's a lot to know about automation and using AI to produce content. I think, outside of specific questions around that, one of the areas that I think is probably important to cover in this is the relationship between dealing with AI overviews and eventually AI mode type search, where GBPs are likely to become less visible, and not less important, but less visible in the way that we're used to seeing them now. So a lot of the demos from Google's I/O 2025 announcements, gave us some kind of sneak previews into kind of directionally where they're going, and then trying to re-envision, how search results pages look because of AI.
Right.
And the AI mode in particular, I think, is going to put a really strong emphasis on not only quality content, but schema structure, data structure on your website. Now, I'm deviating a little bit from GBP, but it works very closely with GBP. So having that NAP consistency you always hear about when you're dealing with GBPs, and making sure your name, address, phone number is identical and that matches your website. Your GBP is usually your source of truth. So when you're doing local citations or any kind of syndication to directories, if you're using Yext or Bright Local or any of the main tools, or you're using an agency that uses some of those tools, it's going to use that as a source of truth to syndicate that out to yp.com and all the different places that are out there. So that's a really important first step, is to make sure that there's continuity and consistency with the name, address, phone number between your website, your GBP, and anything you're syndicating to. Then on top of that, you focusing on the typical schema markup on your website, like local business, is the most popular generally. There are some vertically specific schema markups, but schema markup, for the audience, if they're not familiar with it, is basically a way to structure the content on your site in a way that makes it easy for search engines and the crawlers to absorb and identify and classify all the stuff that's on your site. So being able to really know this is exactly what kind of business it is. It's a local business, the vertical, the hours of operation, the phone number, the address, and then some other potential attributes. You might have products or services. There's schema markup for that as well. Developing out FAQs and your blog writing, for example, is really important. And there's schema markup for that too. Mm-hmm. So making sure that you're using that schema markup to structure your FAQs. So I'm getting to the point now. So when somebody does search in AI overview mode, or certainly AI mode, where it's conversational search at this point. And yes, you'll see local businesses pop up for local searches. I'll make a quick interjecting point here. There is a difference between somebody typing in personal injury lawyer near me versus who is the best personal injury lawyer in Tampa. So one is very proximity based and relatively simple, and would more than likely show up a GBP or some synopsis of here are some local, personal injury attorneys in Tampa, and maybe there's some GBP style maps and things like that, and even in the AI mode results, versus the one that requires research because you're asking who's the best in the market. So now the results may not just show a list of GBPs based on the typical weighting factors and optimization factors that you and I are talking about, Eric, right? So it is going to be thinking about not only the GBP and your reviews and all that it can infer based on looking at that in proximity, but it's going to look at your website and it's going to say, this is the correlating website, and they have schema marked up, really good FAQs. They have blogs, they have maybe how-tos, there's how-to schema markup. So thinking through your content strategy and what you want the world in particular moving into AI to know about your business, and have it in a structured way that is easy for it to ingest real time. It indexes it, but the AI is using that knowledge real time and it's sorting through it. You want to optimize for that. So having a really good strategy around your content, forward looking, how AI is going to be absorbing your GBP, is going to help you both in your GBP output, which is going to be the personal injury lawyer near me, versus who is the best personal injury attorney. And you need not only a good GBP, but you really have to have a good structure on your website as well. So that was a lot. I'll stop there for a second. But
no, that was great, Brantley. And just to add on to what you said there, kind of, for those listening, kind of making sure that your website is updated, has all the schema markup and all the factors on there, is important for your Google business profile to rank correctly as well. And what we've seen, and we'll probably do a separate podcast on it, when it comes to GEO, which is a new term I recently learned, the generative engine optimization. So optimizing for the AI when people are searching on SearchGPT, on ChatGPT. We've seen great success with our lawyer clients. We actually have one personal injury attorney getting a third of his cases from people searching on SearchGPT, because he ranks so highly there, because we have the EAT on the website, we have the schema markup, we have everything that the generative engines are looking for, as they're crawling the web. Because, it's not just Google's AI mode. There's others out there that you want to optimize for, and they understand and look at the website a little bit differently. And so you need to have that kind of data layer of schema behind the scenes for the crawlers to see. And as you mentioned, bring it back to kind of where you started, Brantley, kind of using AI. There's tools like make.com. We'll put that into show notes so everybody can kind of test it out and look at it themselves. But still being very careful, right? You treating AI as what it is, as a child, as a tool, and really checking on what it says. One of my favorite terms I often forget, and you mentioned, is hallucinations, right? And we often forget that AI will hallucinate. What does that mean? It makes up shit, right? It will say stuff that is not true. And it's scary sometimes, when people take it for what it is, or take it as truth, and it isn't. So that's really something that, maybe in 5 years, some listen to this podcast, like, there's no such thing as AI hallucinations. But here in 2025, absolutely that exists, right? So that's something to really pay attention to. And, from an automation standpoint, I think you touched on some tools people can use, like the Yext.com, the Bright Locals, right? Which kind of helps you out and distributes it to all those main directories where you want to be in as well. So make sure, I think that's an important thing to note, is getting into all those directories and being consistent is another way to build the authority which is almost like a simple backlink for you, that directory has you in there. Like you mentioned, yp.com, throw back to the beginning, yellow pages, right? It still matters, but it only matters because Google and the AIs or whoever that are going to rank you are searching through yellow pages to make sure you're in there. I don't think a human's looking at them, but I think you can probably agree, Brantley. It's like Google and, ChatGPT, whoever, Perplexity is looking. If you're in yellow pages, oh, yes, they are. Let's bring them up highly.
Absolutely. It's really fun to watch this evolution happening, kind of unfolding, right in front of us, especially as marketers. It's a little scary too. He's like, well, okay, guess I'm, I can't get lazy now. I'll have to keep learning and following and watching and listening and asking questions. I think the more, for your listeners or even you, Eric, I don't know if you've ever done this, but
yeah.
Early on, I was really curious about, how ChatGPT, this is the one I was using primarily, would come up with a local recommendation. I remember, maybe a year ago, might have been just a little over a year ago, but about a year ago, I was asking, what it's about a local roofer, and it's like, what's the best local roofer? Well, we just want to see what it would come up with. And it came up with, three or four names of companies with some blurb, about these are the top guys. And I recognized some of them, and I'm like, yep, those are ones that I recognize that are big, big ones in the area. And then there's a couple I didn't really recognize. And I'm like, how did you come up with this answer? I started asking it those kind of questions.
So that's a really good, so just real quick, Brantley, I think that's amazing, right? Because we can't ask Google, like, why are you ranking it this way? Or why is it coming up in, why are these the top three? But that's the interesting thing about AI or a chat, right? You can actually ask it follow-up questions like, why did you rank it this way? Or why are you looking at it this way? So sorry, I just want to jump in there because I've done that as well. And I just think it's fascinating that we can actually get a little bit more info about the algorithm that it's using to rank them there. So just wanted to interject there.
I don't know what you learned, but I saw some crazy stuff. First of all, it would, it uses, different sources. It would use, it still does in many cases. What it'll do is it'll go out and it'll look at the stuff we've already talked about. It's going to look at the GBPs. It's going to look at the reviews. It's high on the list, and then it starts looking at the websites related to those GBPs. And then it starts looking at the general web. So it does a web search. And if you've ever looked at the output, the reasoning, so sometimes it'll be there, sometimes it won't. If you use ChatGPT 4.5, if you're a pro user, it actually gives you can visually see what it's thinking. Like as it's like typing in, well, I'm going to look at this first and then, but this was weird, so I'm going to go check this out.
Validate that. I've seen that as well. So definitely it's fun, right? Where I've had it, like it starts writing something and then it will stop. It's like, oh, wait a minute. You want me to be friendly in responses. Let me change the response. Right. And it's fascinating it's like a child, right? Like seeing how the child is literally evolving in front of our eyes.
They're just it's thinking through the whole process. And but when you do that, this is kind of back to the, keeping an eye on how it's coming up with these decisions. What I realized the very first time that I asked it these questions and it started exposing, and it didn't really want to, at first it's like, well, it gave me a paragraph answer. Well, we combine, this, that, reviews, the other. And I'm like, what specifically? Give me websites, give me like what blur.
It's a stubborn child, Brantley, right?
That's it. Well, I tell you, it was really wild because a lot of what factored into its decisions above and beyond the GBP were related articles, comparison blogs, someone that wrote who are the top 5 roofing companies or who are the top 5 personal injury attorneys in Tampa. Those are often editorials or, things that are potentially paid or they're often just created, for that purpose. So what it does is it just gets your brain thinking of, well, these are the levers that I could potentially start pulling to be able to show up more often. And you were in the context we're talking about, AI overviews and then ultimately like an AI mode or conversational search. I think that stuff's going to be incredibly important. So it's no longer going to be it's never really been about silver bullets. Every agency owners always try to explain that to their customers. It's like, well, just tell me I just want to do the stuff that works. It's like, well, that's not how marketing works, but okay. But at the end of the day, we really do have to be thinking about holistically how conversational search is going to work in right around the corner. And if you're with an agency, and I'll plug you guys, I think you guys are awesome. I know you.
Yeah.
You never had to do any work for me, but I know how your brain works because we've talked a lot. And you're a true purist. So understanding the quality is the way to go, and you don't like taking shortcuts, and those are all dying. They have historically died in digital marketing. Well, guess what? It's coming back because quality is going to absolutely be the key difference between you showing up in a GBP organically, even potentially paid search to a degree, quality scores, which is an old term, matter. But I think in the terms of just general AI, conversational AI search, that's going to be key. So thinking about your brand, making sure you're a good operator, you're putting out good work, you're making people happy, you're asking for their input, you're getting testimonials, you're structuring your website in a way that AI can benefit from that. So anybody that's doing something from a voice question on their phone, whether it be through an app or through their car, Alexa or whatever at their house, or they're just using a traditional search model like Google.com, as it becomes more decentralized, the way people get answers to questions that they have, because that's what's happening. Google's desperately trying to make that not happen. but the reality of it is that, Google will morph into what they are, and they'll probably still be a dominant, way of getting answers in the future because they already have an audience. But my point is the way you go about doing it is going to fragment. So you're going to be talking to, it's the Internet of Things. You're going to be talking to your phone, you're going to be talking to your car, you're going to be talking to your computer, which will have built-in AI capabilities, not just, through chatbot. So I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but I mean, the point is that if you really think about that, and the behavior is changing where people are going to expect answers immediately and wherever they are. So AI is going to be meeting you as a human where you are. Wearables, your earbuds, like everything is going to be infused with AI. You will not have a problem getting an answer to any question you'll have practically in any environment you're in. No. You don't have to have a laptop and Google.com in front of you. You know what I'm saying? So that's the message. It's way beyond, this podcast is about GBP, but it is a holistic conversation. And I think mastering your GBP is a critically important step, because today the dominant behavior is still going to Google.com and the map pack. So build for today with tomorrow in mind, knowing that it's coming at rapid speed, and align yourself with good people that know what they're doing.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a good kind of way to kind of wrap it up here, is that the Google business profile is super relevant today. And by making sure that your Google business profile is optimized, you're future-proofing your brick and mortar, because people are going to be searching with however it is in the future, whatever that device ends up being, they're still going to look for local businesses. And the tools that are looking and aggregating those local businesses will be using the same factors to a large extent that you're using right now to come up high on Google business profile. So by optimizing for today, you're ensuring that you'll be at the top tomorrow. And so I think let's end it here, Brantley, with I think we have a quick checklist. I like to always end the episode so someone has a good takeaway here. So you got 5 items on your GBP domination checklist for law firms, right? But this applies to everyone, obviously, right? But we went over pretty much everything here, but just if you're interested and want to kind of have that summary, now's the time to really perk up and pay attention here, because we want to make sure we leave you just the good takeaways here. And so I'll just read off, starting with 5, and after each one, feel free to jump in, Brantley. Number 1 is fill out your entire profile, right? And
absolutely.
And it's so important, every tab, every section, you're going to get rewarded for it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and think through it. So when you're creating products, I see a mistake often where people will not use the categories correctly. Like take a little bit of time to figure out how it works. When you're doing your services, there's a description box. There's also a learn more drop down. You could put a website link. Think about a landing page on your site. There's little steps that you can take to really optimize that particular step.
Makes sense. And then we talked about reputation, right? So don't forget to ask for reviews often. Make it easy. Always reply with professionalism if someone leaves one, and build it into your process, right? So when I was the marketing director at law firms, we added it into the closing package. When someone came in to pick up their check, that's the best time to ask for a Google review. So we made it super simple. It was just part of that checklist. So make sure if you're not asking for reviews as part of a checklist somewhere, you better get started right now.
Couldn't agree more. Very important.
Next one, something we talked about today is structure your site for success, right? So adding the schema markup, adding that relevant content, I think on your website is really important to make sure you're creating that connection between the local relevance on your website with a GBP, and that's future proofing it, as you guys heard us kind of go into tangents here about AI and the future of search.
And to add to that, the important takeaway there, we talked about schema markup and all this nerdy stuff. Local business obviously is the primary one, but the how-to and the FAQs can't express enough, because if you think about that for a second, those are answering questions that are conversational. So think about the people that are typing in and getting conversational queries against AI. You want to have that data structured in a way that it's answering the most common questions, or answering how things are done, the how-to type of stuff. Very, very important. Well over just, optimizing your on-page for copywriting and things like that. It's extremely important.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and we've gone from, creating location pages, and I think I still see it a lot. And just really quick, curious if you think it works or not. People on the location page or the contact us page add hey, we're near Busch Gardens, between Busch Gardens and USF. And you go down the road and you see a porta potty, and we're right next to that porta potty. Kind of making it very descriptive on there, which apparently at some point must have really worked, because I see so many websites still doing that.
Yeah, it's still very common practice. I will tell you that my recent opinion of that is that it needs to change, because it doesn't work as well as it used to. And also the March, April kind of rollout for the core update, I saw some ranking drops, significant ranking drops on some of those type of geo pages.
Yeah.
If they were kind of spammy and not well done, you have to be really careful. I think it is important to still have a local market specific type of strategy, so you're being able to create content around certain markets, but it is all another podcast. There's kind of a new way of doing these geo pages, or you just do away with the geo pages and you can use blogging and other native type pages to simply get your point across and have that localization in there. But the whole idea of taking the root keyword and adding a geo modifier to it, because that's a highly searched term, and then just writing a geo page about that, and then trying to include the history or any kind of local hotspots, and just trying to make it feel local. It used to work really, really well, but it does not work as well anymore. So good point.
Yeah. So it's always changing, always evolving, right? But I think on number 3, the structure, right? The back end schema, that's not going to change, right? That's what you need there. What you're writing about, that might be, again, it's all about quality, right? It's not about just spitting out pages because that's basically keyword stuffing, right? And that's a curse word in the SEO world. So we want to stay away from that. Moving on to number 4, staying consistent, right? So speaking of kind of the quality, you want to make sure that your business is in all the right directories with the right address, with the right phone number, making sure the name matches everywhere in all the directories and listings. You mentioned some great tools, Brantley. There's a bunch of them out there, so just try out, maybe there's services that do it. There's Yext is very popular, which has a recurring fee. And for that recurring fee, they'll make sure you're consistent in all those directories and listings.
That's it. Those are good ones.
Yeah. And then last, number 5, I think that's where we started at the very beginning of the podcast, is keep it fresh, right? So like almost treat it a little bit like a social profile, right? You don't want it to be stale. Add photos, add videos, add those Q&As to questions and answers, and update that profile. If you want to be aggressive weekly or every other week, go in there. And that's kind of a bonus tip here, is not, a lot of people don't realize you can upload videos. And I think that's something that Google is really prioritizing as it's competing with the TikToks and Snapchats of the world, is it wants to show results that have videos in there. It's like a quick tour of your establishment, or like showing the completed work, etc. So keep it up to date. And if you can, include videos there.
Yeah, really, that is extremely important. I'm glad you brought that up, because photos and the video obviously is even better. Google fairly recently started using that as a ranking factor. It had not been the case in the past, but it understands the difference between stock art, stock video you purchase and upload versus something you've uploaded from your phone that has, whether you know it or not, metadata associated to it. So it understands through various methods that it's a legitimate, local, authentic, customer video, maybe a customer testimonial or showing your work, to your point, Eric.
Yeah.
Those are extremely important. So I do see the ones that are much more active in that. And that's why I say the automation's augmentation. You don't want that to be your primary, content, plan. So it still requires people to be engaged with their Google Business Profile, uploading videos, and then writing descriptions around those that are pretty detailed, and you'll definitely see a difference.
Nice. Awesome. Well, we'll put the checklist in the show notes as well for everyone. And Brantley, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast for a second time and really helping to unpack how law firms and professional services, or really anyone, can boost their visibility and win more local business through Google Business Profile, and future-proof themselves as AI is taking over all of marketing, right? And if you're serious about growing your caseload, share this episode with your marketing team, or maybe the managing partner at the law firm, and start applying these tips today. And did we get nerdy? Absolutely. So feel free to reach out to Brantley, to myself, if you have any questions. Happy to do a deep dive in there. To learn more about Brantley, to get in touch with him and his work, head on over to homepromarketing.agency. And myself, as always, I like ending the episode with a glass in hand. I don't have it ready, but what's today's wine pours, the SEO sommelier? I want to keep it local. And we got local SEO. So I'm in Tampa Bay. We got Keel and Curley here. So we're going to do the wild berry Pinot Noir from them. So they do a lot of fruit wines there. I really like their berry, or actually wild berry Pinot Noir. So I like it. It's crafted with intention locally and leaves a lasting impression, just like your Google Business Profile should. Thanks for listening to The Search Bar. I'll see you next time. And don't forget to optimize before your competitors do. And Brantley, thank you so much for being such an awesome guest today.
Always a pleasure. And I think I'm going to have a glass of wine with lunch now.
Go for it. Nothing wrong with that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone.